This September, a federal judge ordered the release of a former U.S. Green Beret indicted in connection with a failed 2020 coup attempt against Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, rejecting arguments he would flee while awaiting trial on weapons smuggling charges. Jordan, I might mess this one up, Goudreau? Man, that looks like, speaking of Louisiana, that looks like a Louisiana name, was arrested in July after a 4-year investigation into the amphibious raid that ended with several combatants killed by Venezuelan security forces and 2 of his U.S. Army Special Forces buddies locked away in a Maduro government prison. Back in 2020, Goudreau attempted to supply and plan a mission that he hoped would end in President Nicolás Maduro's arrest. However, 2 boats carrying 2 former Army Green Berets and 60 Venezuelan dissidents were intercepted. Their failed plan was to raid military bases in the country and ignite a rebellion. The plot, exposed by the Associated Press, was carried out by a ragtag group of Venezuelan army deserters with whom Goudreau allegedly helped arm and train in neighboring Colombia. Goudreau immediately claimed responsibility for Operation Gideon, but said he was acting in concert with Venezuela's opposition to protect democracy. Goudreau has no criminal record and was a 3-time Bronze Star recipient in Iraq and Afghanistan. What are your thoughts on Mr. Goudreau's botched plan? You Green Beret, you.
I'm very familiar with this. Here's what's crazy.
I figured you would be.
So Jordan Goudreau,
dang it.
I actually worked with him.
No way.
So he used to be in C-110. He was in the EUCOM, European Command Theater, Commanders in Extremis Force. So, each one of the 5 areas of operation geographically across the globe had a company that was reinforced with enablers to do hostage rescue, direct action, special reconnaissance, counter-proliferation, and some other mission sets that were specialized. And he was part of the EUCOM SIF. And I think he actually worked with me in the AFRICOM SIF when we stood it up. So I stood up the AFRICOM SIF as a sniper reconnaissance team sergeant and remember him. I actually remember him being very squared away and being a really good soldier. Now, he was one of the younger guys. I was pretty senior at the time, but I read about this and I heard about this, and I'm very familiar with what took place. It was a failed amphibious operation, there's a whole bunch of complexities to this. One, they trained them in Colombia. They were Venezuelan outcasts, essentially, that had turned against the Venezuelan government, which is obviously corrupt. We currently, as an administration and government, believe that the president in charge of Venezuela right now is there because he cheated. He basically lied. I mean, we had our own guy that we wanted to put in. The CIA, I imagine, is very heavily involved with the influence there. They're a communist country. They hate America. There's a whole bunch of issues there. They do this amphibious raid. Jordan was not one of the guys on the ground. He actually launched this operation with the indigenous element with 2 former special operations guys. Both these guys got rolled up. They're currently in prison serving like a life sentence right now, 20 years. And he got off. He was in charge of it. He was actually commanding and controlling it, and then was scot-free until a New York prosecutor decided to hem him up on weapons charges. Now, here's the controversy. The controversy is whether or not it was sanctioned by Trump and the U.S. government. According to him and people inside, it was funded privately, but it was supported by the U.S. government that involved some government officials. And look, like, this happens. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. I was in Libya post my military experience, before I was actually contracting officially with the CIA, saw it firsthand how unattributed organizations and people were leveraged to do security, force protection, whatever it is. We actually have a covert action clause that allows us to do covert action across the globe, and as a government deny that. I mean, it's not secret. It's very Googleable. I'm afraid that potentially, if he didn't think that was, then it was an official covert potential operation to do it. Because I imagine if he was successful and they actually couped, the government wouldn't be coming out in a statement saying that's not our brand, which is what Pompeo did immediately when those guys got rolled up. He goes, we weren't involved. The morning after those guys got rolled up, he said, we weren't involved because if we were involved, it wouldn't have been compromised and wouldn't have went off that way. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. So I'm very familiar with the case, and I think the weapons charge against Jordan is BS. But I also think, guys, like if you're a former special operations guy and you have all the talent and you're getting involved in something like this that doesn't have any sanctions or overt nature behind it. We did this. There's classic cases of this in Yemen, classic cases of other governments doing this in South Africa with executive outcomes. It's like, don't get involved. I personally have been asked to get involved in these type of things, going after State Department named bad guys that were on the most wanted list because I knew where these guys lived at, these potential bad guys on this list. And there were heavy rewards, $2 million plus dollar rewards. And then when I got deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, I realized it was my ass on the line. And if I got rolled up, I was getting rolled up for money. And it's like, it's not worth any amount of money to put your life on the line to do something unsanctioned, especially for the U.S. government. So I know a lot about it. I would just say that, like, those guys, like, man, maybe they had good initiative and good intentions. Bad to get involved with something like that.
Are you surprised that we don't see more people with a special operations background doing stuff like this?
Yeah, I actually am. I thought about that recently.
I mean,
actually am
we're
surprised.
not that unique, right? We
No.
come from communities that number in the thousands. I think it's a good thing that we don't see it more often because I think that shows what you're saying. They have the ability to critically think and get to this place where they realize that why would I be doing this? Who am I doing this for? I'm not in the military anymore. Maybe, I hung the spurs up. If I wanted to do that, maybe I'll pursue going back and getting actually an above board, legitimate, either going back into the military or an organization that's consumer facing. And I'm very upfront. So I think it's a good thing that we don't see more of this. But as I was reading this and as I'm listening to you talk about this, I'm also a little surprised that we don't see more of it because I don't know about you, but I work with some crazy fuckers.
Yeah. And the reality is we have all the talent to actually get this done. I mean,
Yeah.
like strategically and tactical planning for something like this is really complex. And the skill set that we have is the ability to plan, organize, and do something like this. The biggest mistake they made, which is maybe why we don't see a lot of smarter guys getting rolled up and stuff like that, the biggest mistake is actually having boots on the ground for something that's so statistically likely to go wrong. Like, it's by, with, and through, but you could launch an auxiliary force from a boat, from a base station, from Colombia, like in this case, launch them and support them because you train them. And that's the point. But there's a lot of risk getting involved when you're on the ground, literally trying to do something like this. And of note, if people look into this, both the guys on the ground that got rolled up on the border, they got rolled up in an amphibious assault. What they think happened is some of the Venezuelans that were part of the assault force were traitors, were embeds, were working for the other side because the Venezuelan government was already prepared to receive them. They actually killed several of the guys and injured many more when they tried to do the raid. The Americans had their passports, their IDs on their person in true name.
Strong.
Yeah, it's like why would you do that? And look, these guys were actually real young SF guys. Like one of them.
I was going to say, were those two guys Green Berets as well? I mean, you know as well as I do, the term special operations gets thrown out quite a bit, as special forces does, and people don't understand the two. Special forces, for clarity for people, is specifically Green Berets. Special operations is an umbrella term that encapsulates all branches of the military special operations forces.
Yeah, both of them were Green Berets, and I believe one of them and Jordan met in Ranger Battalion, so they had some history, but they were young guys. They were E7s. Nothing against an E7 or an E6 who serves in special operations, But along the way, moving your, you move through the ranks and then switched from enlisted to officers. You have a full spectrum view. I went from E1 to E9 across the enlisted branch. You see things full spectrum from strategic to tactical. And I'm afraid a lot of these young guys have a very nuanced perspective, and they don't have a lot of big picture perspective of how things can go wrong strategically. And they made a lot of mistakes. That's 101 in foreign internal defense. One, they were on the ground. Two, they didn't have a compromise plan, and now they're spending the rest of their lives potentially in a Venezuelan prison for what? And I think a lot of this potentially is going on, but it's going on the intelligent way, which is likely assist and advise. It's like, somebody in a talk in Israel helping the Israelis go after Hamas and advising them from a contractual level or a private level. And I think that's the right way to do it. I though, am still surprised that you're not seeing more of these dudes get rolled up, especially Navy SEALs, because we know they're rogue. They're cowboys.
I mean, let's talk about the number one error in their plan. They took a Green Beret force and tried to do an amphibious assault, which is clearly not your wheelhouse. That's our world, sir. I don't know what you guys are thinking. At least I wouldn't have had my passport and my ID.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Shop the new Freedom Capsule at bornprimitive.com.
This topic comes up all the time of what should people do with their military experience, right? The government poured millions of dollars into you and I. And, I guess the question becomes for anybody who goes down that pipeline is, what do you do with it? And these people chose to do this particular expression of that. And what I say to that is, you are free. Your experiences are yours. The knowledge you have is yours to do with what you want. But if you choose to express it in this particular fashion, you're going to have to suffer the consequences. So maybe use the problem solving and objective thinking, and maybe even just the military decision-making process when you're thinking about these things. Am I involved in something legitimate? Is this worth it to me? What are the cascading consequences to not only myself, my family, but maybe even the country? I mean, this is embarrassing to the country, and specifically, let's be honest, the Green Beret community. I mean, I don't know how you guys. No, it's, again, they're personal experiences, and if you point them in the wrong direction, actually a better way to describe it would probably be, I've been hearing this a lot, when people talk about weapons of war, when they talk about banning weapons. I am arriving at, if not have arrived at the conclusion that weapons of war is actually not the things that we were holding in our hands. I think you and I are the weapons of war, because it's what they taught us. It's the experiences. It's the selection and screening processes. I could hold a hammer or I could hold an M4. You know what I mean? The end state could potentially be the same. And I'm not saying it negatively that we are a weapon of war, but the reality is the tools in our hands may shift. It's the experiences, it's the knowledge, it's the training. And we still have these things when we leave the military. And like any tool, if you misuse it, you might encounter failure, but it's also, you're responsible for the consequences of your actions. So if you are a weapon of war or a tool of war, and you're going to act like a tool, man, your defense is going to be a tough one. I hope these guys don't spend the rest of their life in jail, but I could also see a world where they do.
Yeah, it's not looking good for them, especially in Venezuela, where we don't have exactly a good foreign policy strategy with dealing with them. We've just kind of shunned them and cut them out. I mean, we just seized Maduro's the presidential plane recently because it was they said the U.S. government called it a bad transaction. And so I look at this and I also think, I agree with this concept that we were the weapons, because I think more people were killed with Hellfires and JDAMs from a radio call than an actual rifle as a weapon of war. And it's like good and bad. We have really cool skill sets that we could turn into a business plan model and tackle business, or some
or
form
misuse
of
them.
Yeah. Entrepreneurship, leadership, etc. But a lot of guys are actually going, hey man, I learned this tactical experience, so the only life I have to live is on a flat range, working with, developing some counterinsurgency organization. And I've seen it good in good ways. I've seen Navy SEALs and Green Berets do counter poaching operations and do it the right way, and helping, especially in South Africa and places across Africa that are dealing with that. And then I've seen it in toxic ways like this. I mean, in Yemen, where you had dudes that were going out and doing hits for a cutout company that was ran by another country, by Oman. And I'm like, what? You guys were doing hits? I mean, this is a documentary that was on TV, on Vice, actually, where it's like you're doing hits for an Oman-based company because of your background. Like, that's probably the wrong use of your skill sets. So yeah, you could fall into two different categories, where it's like you could take your skill sets and you could educate people and send them down the right path, or you could take those skill sets and completely abuse that power and just have a militia going down the wrong path.
Yeah. No, it's a wild time, man. I think the lesson to be learned is, if it's going to be amphibious, you know who to call.
You need SWIC. You need a
Actually, to be honest with you, that's probably a good call. What's going on, everybody? I want to let you know about an ongoing effort in Western North Carolina to help victims of Hurricane Helene, and how you can help our friends at the Sentinel Foundation. The hurricane has displaced people around the region and destroyed countless homes. However, Sentinel is on the ground helping. They've been actively getting critical supplies to residents in some of the area's most isolated locations. They've been able to provide over 60 Starlink systems to fire departments, police departments, and churches, so that they can communicate and coordinate for their communities. They've also organized both aircraft and ground units to transport and deliver donations. So far, they've accepted and organized an estimated 7 million pounds of materials and distributed about 4 million pounds to support the ongoing relief efforts. Sentinel has also continued to monitor reports of child trafficking, exploitation within the area of operation through law enforcement. To find out more about their efforts to help hurricane victims and their anti-child exploitation efforts, and to see how you can help, please check out foundationsentinel.org.